What if people didn't just lose their freedom, but lost their will entirely? Not through violence, not through death, but through control so complete they stop being people at all. This story is about one idea. Power doesn't just dominate, it reshapes people into tools that serve it. Welcome back to Politics of Fear, where we treat horror movies like the cultural artifacts they actually are. Because horror films don't just scare audiences, they reveal the anxieties a culture is trying very hard not to confront. And sometimes those anxieties don't come from monsters that destroy, but from systems that manipulate. Which brings us to White Zombie, 1932, often considered the first feature-length zombie film. The depiction of a zombie in the film is far different than the zombie of the modern era. White Zombie follows a couple traveling to Haiti, where a wealthy plantation owner named Charles Beaumont becomes obsessed with possessing the woman Madeline. Unable to win her affection, he turns to a mysterious figure named Murder Legendre for help. Desperate to have Madeline for himself, Charles agrees to Legendre's plan. Together they transform her into one of the living dead, stripping her of her will and identity. To the outside world, she appears to die, and her fiancé Neil mourns her and buries her, believing she is gone. But the story does not end there. When Neil later sees her wandering like a ghost, distant and unrecognizable, he begins to realize that she is not dead at all. She's been turned into something else. Using supernatural power, Legendre reshapes people into something else rather than simply killing them. Those he controls do not fight back. They don't even seem aware of what has been taken from them. Using that power, he turns people into zombies, living workers who are silent, emotionless bodies stripped of identity and forced into labor. They continue to move, continue to function, but only in service to someone else's will. And when that control is finally broken, the result is just as disturbing. The zombies, suddenly freed from Legendre's influence, do not return to normal life. Instead, they walk silently off a cliff, as if unable to exist at all without something directing them. As the film progresses, Charles himself begins to lose control, realizing too late that Legendre's power extends beyond simple obedience, pulling him into the same system he thought he was using. What begins as a desire to possess someone becomes a loss of power entirely. To understand White Zombie, you have to understand the early 1930s. This was the Great Depression. Economic collapse, mass unemployment, millions of people suddenly reduced to survival. By the early 1930s, nearly 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed, and entire industries had shut down or drastically reduced production. Banks failed in waves, wiping out savings overnight and leaving people with no safety net. Bread lines stretched through city streets, serving millions of meals each day. Workers who once had stable jobs found themselves standing in unemployment lines, waiting for a chance just to get by. The stability people thought they had could disappear without warning. At the same time, the United States maintained control and influence in Haiti following its occupation from 1915 to 1934. During that period, American forces oversaw infrastructure projects that relied on forced labor systems, where Haitians were compelled to work under harsh conditions. Men were often taken from their homes and required to build roads and transport materials with little choice in the matter. Labor became something imposed, not chosen. While the film is set in Haiti, the fear it expresses is not really about Haiti, because the structures it reflects already existed. The fear is something more direct, the fear of becoming disposable, of being defined not by who you are, but by what you can be used for, of becoming something in a world that no longer needs you to be human. The film's most powerful imagery shows zombies working in a sugar mill, moving in silence, repeating the same motions endlessly. There is no exhaustion, no conversation, no personality, just labor. A system that doesn't require workers to think, only to function. At one point, Charles watches as a worker falls into a spinning grinder. No one reacts, the others continue moving with the same mechanical precision as if nothing has happened. Their movements are precise and mechanical, almost indistinguishable from the machines itself. The workers are no longer separate from the process. They have become a part of it. This is industrialization at its most extreme, and for audiences in the early 1930s, that image would not have felt abstract. During the Great Depression, millions of workers were already facing layoffs, wage cuts, or unstable factory conditions, reduced to whatever roles they could fill just to survive. Industrial production had collapsed, jobs became scarce, and when work was available, it was often repetitive, low-paying, and insecure. In many industries, workers were expected to perform the same tasks over and over again with little control, little stability, and little recognition as individuals. Didn't need their identity, only their output. This is exactly what the sugar mill represents, a place where human beings are reduced to motion and utility, where what matters is not who you are, but what you can produce. And in White Zombie, that process is taken one step further. The workers do not just behave like machines, they are emptied of everything that would allow them to be anything else. Their thoughts, their emotions, their ability to resist, all gone. What remains is something disturbingly efficient. Legendre does not manipulate through force. He barely needs to act at all. Look, people lose themselves completely. That is what makes him so effective as a symbol. He represents authority at its most abstract, something invisible yet absolute. For audiences in the early 1930s, that idea would have felt uncomfortably familiar. During the Great Depression, power often did not appear as something physical or direct. It operated through structures that could not be easily seen or confronted. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and millions lost their livelihoods, not because of a single visible enemy, but because of forces that felt distant, complex, and beyond individual control. Over 9,000 banks failed between 1930 and 1933, wiping out savings and leaving people with little recourse or explanation. At the same time, political and economic authority felt increasingly centralized and impersonal. Decisions made in financial institutions or by government bodies could reshape entire lives overnight. Workers were laid off, wages were cut, and opportunities disappeared, often without warning or accountability. Legendre's victims do not fight back because they no longer can. Their will has already been taken from them. In that sense, Legendre becomes more than a villain. He becomes a reflection of a broader anxiety, the fear that influence could operate quietly, shaping behavior and determining outcomes, without ever needing to announce itself. Because the most unsettling form of power is not the one you can see, it's the one you cannot escape. When Madeline becomes a zombie, the change is immediate. She becomes distant, passive, empty. She still looks human, but there's nothing left behind the surface, no soul. Her expression doesn't change. Her voice is gone, her presence feels hollow, as if the person who once existed there has simply been removed. What makes this even more unsettling is that the transformation isn't entirely permanent. When Legendre is temporarily knocked unconscious, there are brief moments where Madeline begins to return to herself. Her expression softens. There are glimpses of awareness, like the person she once was is trying to come back. But the moment Legendre regains control, she slips back into that same vacant state. That detail makes the horror even more disturbing, because it suggests that her identity isn't gone, it's being suppressed, turned off, and on at someone else's will. That transformation reflects a deeper fear, that identity itself can be stripped away. Everything that makes someone who they are, memory, emotion, will, can be erased without leaving visible damage behind. And in that context of the film, that loss of identity is not accidental. It is the result of someone else's desire for control. Charles does not just want Madeline's love, he wants possession. In a cultural moment where relationships were often framed in terms of ownership and control, the film takes that idea to its extreme conclusion, that a person can still exist physically, but no longer be present. White Zombie may look simple by modern standards, but its central fear never really disappeared. The idea that people can be reduced to function, that identity can be stripped away, that structures can reshape individuals into something obedient. Those anxieties did not end in the 1930s. If anything, they evolved. Today, the systems look different, but the pressure feels familiar. Work is still often defined by productivity, efficiency, output, what employers love to term as multitasking. People are tracked, measured, and optimized in ways that prioritize performance over individuality. Technology promises convenience, but it also creates new forms of control. Algorithms shape what we see, what we buy, even how we communicate with one another. Decisions that once felt personal can now feel guided or nudged by forces operating in the background. And much like the forces people feared during the Great Depression, those systems are often invisible. There is no single figure like Legendre to resist, no clear source of control, just invisible algorithms that influence behavior in ways that are easy to accept because they feel normal. That is what makes the fear in White Zombie endure, because it is not just about losing freedom, but it's about losing the sense that felt you ever had it to begin with. So the next time you watch White Zombie, remember you're not just watching the first zombie film. You're watching a fear that existed long before modern horror defined it. A fear of losing autonomy, of losing identity, of becoming something that exists only to serve someone else's power. In the end, the horror is not death, but obedience. And in White Zombie, the monsters are not trying to destroy the world. They are there to work within it. Thanks for watching Politics of Fear, where horror movies are not just scary. They are history screaming back at us. But this isn't the film you think you know. This isn't your typical Hollywood modern version of the zombie film. No, that wasn't it. This isn't the zombie you're thinking of as a modern Hollywood version. I feel like there were a couple flubs, but could be fixed.
I think that those are all